I guess this new mode of teaching or exchanging information feels less personal. But I think it has advantages. And one of the advantages is that you shouldn't be, it's easier to ask a question. Because in a classroom, people might raise a hand and then everybody looks at them, you feel shy, you don't want to ask, it might feel strange. Here it's easier. You just type it in the forum, presumably people won't even know who you are. So please ask questions as you go along. And what I will do in the next, what I would like to do in the next 45 minutes, I want to briefly talk about the difference in facts and opinions. And then I would, once we clarified that, zoom into a literature I'm familiar with and hopefully generate some facts as opposed to opinions. And in particular, what I'm going to talk about mainly will be the extraction, the management, and the use of natural resources, which is my field of expertise. As I just said, I will start creating the difference and explaining the difference exactly between facts and opinions. I will focus 25% or 10 minutes on that. And then I will, after we establish that, zoom into natural resource economics and introduce you to a literature, to simple models, simple ideas, simple facts, and provide some literature which you can follow up with if you're interested. When I move along, please ask clarification questions if something is not clear. I will try to be precise, and most things are simple, but there might be some confusion. Just ask. In the end, we will have 10 minutes to discuss things. So if you disagree with something or you want to know more about something, you can follow up and ask me, and I will try to answer. So, obviously, opinions are not facts. What is a simple definition of a fact? It's an objective and verifiable observation, which typically is systematically collected and analyzed to provide empirical evidence. In science, this is typically contrasted with a hypothesis or a theory, which is either coming before the collection of the empirical evidence, it's motivating the collection of the empirical evidence, or it's used to ex post rationalize something you observe. Typically, in good research, these two things go hand in hand. You create a hypothesis, you check it with the data, you do understand something, not understand something, you go back, you refine your hypothesis, you again go back to the data, and there is a back and forth. And you will go back and forth many, many times. This is good research, and eventually, you will be able to create a fact, not an opinion. Let me give you a more specific example with something I'm familiar with. So how do you develop facts? And what I'm doing here is, this is how I personally develop facts. So first, I make an observation which excites me personally. Something which might not sound very exciting to you, but sounded exciting to me a few years back when I developed this specific fact, or participated in developing it, was observing that prices of services, of local goods, like paying a taxi driver to get you from A to B, are higher in countries which have a lot of oil. In particular, if we focus on Moscow, taxi prices will typically be higher if the oil price is high. One observation. You can generalize this. And you can go over time and collect a time series of taxi prices and a time series of the oil price. And what you presumably will see is that taxi prices in Moscow seem to rise when the oil price is high, and they seem to go down when the oil price is low. Interesting. What you do then is typically trying to put a theory together or a hypothesis which explains what is happening here. And this has been done already 30, 40 years ago by an important paper, which basically has shown mathematically this simple idea. If you have full employment, so everybody in an economy works, and suddenly you give people more money, they will spend it. At least partly they will spend it on local good, like driving a taxi. But if there is full employment and there is nobody else who can enter and also start driving a taxi, the price for the taxis is going to go up. This is the theory explaining our observation. With this theory, you can then go ahead and generate predictions. The simplest predictions, you can do more complicated ones, will be next time the oil price goes up, prices for taxis will go up. Once you've derived such a prediction, you go ahead, you collect data, you see the oil price increase, then you collect data from taxi drivers and you find, hopefully, or not hopefully, you find prices increased or not, did not increase, and then you reject or do not reject your hypothesis. This is the simplest possible way in which one fact can be created. And ideally, once you've done this once, you extend this to other regions, other time periods, other circumstances, with full employment, without full employment, until you collect so much information and you've shown there is such a strong link between those two that you can say, this is a fact. If oil prices go up, local prices of goods are going to go up. As opposed to that, we have the opinion. An opinion is a subjective and often non-verifiable belief. An example would be, God created the world in 7 days. To the best of my knowledge, it's impossible to verify whether it was 6, 7, or 8. And many people would argue it's impossible to verify whether the God exists at all. So this is an opinion, this will be a belief, and it's difficult to verify. Unfortunately, in some discussions, and I notice it in private discussion, but also in public discussions, some people give equal weights to opinions and facts. Again, facts are carefully constructed observations of reality, which tell us something about how the reality works. Opinions is a non-verifiable belief. But in a debate, sometimes people give equal weight to those two things. This is unfortunate, since in many cases, facts are crucial to make a reasonable decision, but people sometimes decide to listen to opinions. Let me give you just one very simple example from what just happened in the last 6 months. On the 1st of January, the World Health Organization, WHO, asked Chinese authorities to report on what is happening in China. A day later, they tweeted, something is happening in China. 10 days later, they provided information on how to deal with those things. A month later, they published advices on whether and how to use masks. And 3.5 months later, they published information on how to introduce large-scale movement restrictions, the one we've seen in Moscow a few months back. You've seen that there are two things which are blue. One is saying use of masks, and the other one is saying large-scale movement restrictions. In the last 3-4 months, in public and in private conversations, arguments would be made in debates, and some are opinions and some are facts. And we should try our best to listen to facts and avoid opinions. This is imperfect because it was very quickly how it developed. And as I pointed out before, developing a fact takes time. Still, in the last couple of months, things have been published because some researchers invested a lot of time. For instance, this is just an example. On April the 3rd, in Nature, which is considered to be one of the best journals on Earth, which goes through a very careful publication process. So it's not just somebody writes an opinion, it's you're colleagues look at it and say, you've done this wrong or this right, and you need to adjust. And they've published a paper which suggests that masks are effective. Please get me right. I'm not advertising this at this point. I'm just saying that before you form a decision, you should collect information, and you should ideally collect facts, as many as possible. There may be also papers out there which suggest the opposite, because other experiments have been conducted. But this is a good source which allows you to collect facts in terms of information. Another one, 2 months ago, was published on how movement restrictions in cities 100 years ago during the Spanish flu affected cities. And they seem to suggest that once a city is hit by a pandemic, by the Spanish flu in the US, introducing large-scale restrictions, such as a lockdown in Moscow, did not have long-term or short-term negative consequences, economic consequences, relative to a city which was also hit by the pandemic, but didn't introduce those restrictions. Again, this is just one paper, and there may be other opinions out there, but this is the type of source you want to use to collect your information, because these papers, these people are trying to generate facts rather than giving their opinions. And there is still lots of uncertainty surrounding the evidence. Nevertheless, we should rely on facts as much as possible. Now, with this in mind, you've just experienced it yourself in the last couple of months that there is debate on those two issues. Let me zoom into a literature which I'm much better familiar with. Natural resources. And we will spend the remaining 30 minutes on that. So what's the link? The thing is that two of the most important questions in natural resource economics are: many people question the exhaustibility of natural resources and its potential consequences. Can natural resources such as oil, gold, or silver be exhausted or not? And what are the consequences of this? And maybe a bit more urgent, many people question the existence of climate change and its potential consequences. So, and again, we have a public debate where you have facts and you have opinions. I see a hand. Okay.
I accidentally put it up.
Okay, no problem. So basically, we have a similar situation in the public debate, like we had with the coronavirus and the mask and the lockdown issues, where people disagreed, and where you would have discussions at a dinner table, and some people would give facts and some people would give opinions, and those things would be treated equally, but they shouldn't, obviously. So let me give you a few facts on those things, which you can then, if you want, follow up in other literatures and ask me questions about. Quick introduction to the key papers or key books, which I'm going to use in my thinking. So if you're interested in why some civilizations survive and why some collapse, why did the Incas disappear, and why did, I don't know, the UK ended up 300 years ago dominating the world. So Gerhard Diamond goes back in time for 4,000 years and look at some civilization, why they stopped existing, and tries to provide reasons for that. And in particular, two of the reasons, he ends up with 5, but 2 of the reasons are local climate change and exhaustion of resources. And I'll discuss this with you now. If you're Less interested in this long-term perspective and more interested in short-run, Daniel Jürgen is considered the Bible of natural resource economics if you want to understand, in particular, the sector of oil and gas. He has a follow-up book, which is 2005 or something like that, or 2010, it should be 2010, something like that, which thinks about exhaustibility of resources. So these I can recommend. These are books. The key papers in economics are Malthus. So if Adam Smith is considered to be the father of economics, Malthus is considered to be the father of natural resource economics. And he is the first to be scared about exhaustibility of resources. Hotelling, roughly 100 years later, gives him the theoretical answer to his concern. Jevons was the first to be worried about pollution. And Pigou, 70 years later, or 60 years later, would give him the answer to how to theoretically deal with pollution. So these are the key papers on the questions of worrying about exhaustibility and solving it, and worrying about pollution and solving it. Before I start, and I tell you essentially just a couple of stories, which are, however, facts. They're based on facts. Let's differentiate between two types of natural resources. One is non-renewables, and the definition here is the resource doesn't renew itself at a sufficient rate for sustainable use. This is fossil fuels or minerals. And renewable resource, it does renew itself at a sufficient rate of sustainable use. This is like fisheries and timber. So it grows fast enough, it's not in the ground. Now, let's start with the exhaustibility of resources, the probability that this happened, and the consequences. And let's start with renewables. Oh, sorry. Before we do this, just one quick structuring thoughts on how Malthus thought about the exhaustibility. So Malthus, this is this gentleman who is considered to be the father of natural resource economics. This is his picture. So he would live between late 18th or mid 18th and early 19th century. And essentially he came up with a model which is still taught in the undergrad in economics. And this is essentially can be summarized by this picture. On the x-axis, you have time. So you can think of year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And on the y-axis, you have quantity. You can think of population, like 1 person, 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, and so on. And resources, 1 kilogram of wheat, 2 kilograms of wheat, 3, so one is a resource, which people need for surviving, and the other one is the number of people on Earth. And Malthus, in the 19th century, looked at the data and saw that actually the population is growing much faster than the available agricultural production. So what he predicted is that if we continue growing like that as a people, what will happen is at some point the population will be so high relative to the available resources that we will start fighting over it. And as a result of that, because of war or starvation, people will die. This is the first big worry, and this is called Malthusian catastrophe. Has this ever happened with renewable resources? So renewable are those which are reproducing itself sufficiently quickly in principle. Easter Island. The classical story which you would find on this specific issue is the Easter Island. It's an island in the Pacific where the star is located. If you didn't hear about that, presumably you have seen those guys. This is what the island is famous for. Unfortunately, there is a tragic, very tragic story to this island, and it's summarized in Gerhard Diamond. I give you the very brief summary. Between 1200 and 1500, the population on the island was using timber, so they were cutting trees much faster than the trees were able to reproduce themselves. As a result of that, since they needed timber to produce weapons and to prepare food, they at some point started fighting and essentially killed each other for the last available tree. So they're famously given as an example for a culture which committed what is called ecocide. It's like suicide, but it's an ecocide. Is this necessarily inevitable? So does it necessarily happen if you have this problem, you will run and you will destroy the civilization? So just to give you the numbers, from the top of my head, I think at the point in time when the crisis started, the population was, and I'm guessing here from the top of my head, was something like 20,000 on the island. By the time the civilization after the ecocide was rediscovered by the Europeans, the population was less than 1,000, something like that. Is this inevitable? Well, no, it isn't. And the example is again coming from Gerhard, and the example is Japan. In fact, Japan had a very similar situation in a similar point in time. It's a bit bigger, but between 15 and 1600, Japan was also using trees up far too fast, and they were not sufficiently quickly reproducing themselves for sustainable use. But Japan understood, the leadership of Japan understood this fact because they have seen the numbers, and they adjusted. What did they do? And how did this happen? Well, in 1657, there was a huge fire of a big city, which is nowadays Tokyo. And since they needed to rebuild it, they demanded a lot of timber, which required a lot of trees. And they understood, ooh, there is a shortage because prices started skyrocketing for trees and timber. Once the government understood this, they started regulating. What is a regulation? Essentially, government regulations can limit the amount of a common good that is available for use by any individual. Essentially, they specified who could do what, where, when, how, and how much. So they restricted use. In the long run, they also created incentives to increase supply. As a result of that, and this is amazing, nowadays, Japan, despite the fact that they have one of the highest population density on Earth, they have one of the best managed forests on Earth. So this, in the long run, transformed Japan into a country which would manage its resource. And the civilization never collapsed. So what did I just do? I gave you an example of a renewable resource being exhausted by two different civilizations. One didn't acknowledge the deterioration and hence collapsed. The other one did acknowledge, understood the facts, acted accordingly, and hence is doing still pretty well. Now, is the same true for non-renewable resources, such as oil or gold? Let's look into this. So this is a bit more modern, and these examples I've cherry-picked, so they're not coming from Gerhard. So here we have a bad example. This is the island of Nauru, northeast of Australia, also in the Pacific, like the East Ireland. What happened to Nauru? Well, in 1975, Nauru had one of the highest GDP per capita on Earth. I think it's actually the highest on Earth. Why? Because they had huge phosphate deposits. Unfortunately, they completely mismanaged this wealth. They used the money from selling phosphate to travel, to buy expensive cars, to throw big parties. Today, Nauru is a relatively poor country, $10,000 PPP per person in terms of GDP per capita, and it depends on Australian aid. Bad story. Non-renewables can screw you up. Is that inevitable? So I'm asking exactly the same question. And of course, the answer would be no, it's not. Let me give you a success story. Botswana in the south of Africa. It became independent roughly in the 60s, and it has one of the lowest GDP per capita in the world by 1960. So the opposite of Nauru. So just on the other side of the GDP per capita scale. They get lucky and they discover a lot of diamonds. They use the revenue wisely, and nowadays it's one of the richer and much more stable countries in Africa. It has $20,000 purchasing power parity in terms of GDP per capita, which is close and I guess currently higher than Belarus has. What happened? Well, essentially the monarch, whose name is Seretse. By the way, there's a wonderful movie about that, created in 2016. I very much recommend it, because apparently this guy was really a cool guy. And this is what economists would call a benevolent dictator. So in many cases, in private discussions, you would consider a dictator to be a bad thing. But the dictator can be something very good if the dictator cares deeply about the well-being of its people. It's like, I don't know, the parents, the loving parents towards the children. So Seretse was one of those dictators. So he listened to his educated advisors and to international advisors who based their statements on facts and essentially followed what would become known, because he started doing it before it became a theoretical model, what is known as the Hardwick Rule, 1977. The basic idea, the simplest version of the idea, is the value of the resources which you take out of the ground, like diamonds, phosphate, gold, oil, should not be spent by consuming it for parties or nice cars or traveling. Instead, it should be transformed in other types of capital. It should be invested in education and health, which economists call human capital. It should be invested in infrastructure. And if everything is well, if you're a country which is doing already very well in terms of education, health, and infrastructure, save it and use the interest. Do not spend everything. Sounds very reasonable. So this is a good story of using natural resources to create a push in your country and to bring prosperity. So what did I just do? I took two different types of resources, one renewable, timber, one non-renewable, so phosphate or diamond, both are non-renewable. And I gave you examples where, facing an issue with the non-renewable, one country didn't observe the deterioration of trees by just like facing the facts, while the other one did, adjusted, and succeeded. And similarly, I've shown you two examples with non-renewable resources where one country misused the wealth and did not invest it wisely, while the other one was listening to advice and bringing prosperity to its country, Botswana. Now, let me move to pollution and climate change. So the first big question in natural resource economics was running out of the resource. The second one is pollution and climate change. Let's start with defining what the carbon cycle is. So what is a carbon cycle? Plants, like trees, take carbon dioxide for photosynthesis and create energy by doing so. Animals eat those plants and get energy. Plants and animals release carbon dioxide when they decompose or burn. And that way, carbon dioxide returns to the atmosphere, where again it can be absorbed by the plants. So it's a cycle. cycle, get it in, produce energy, we eat it, we die, we release. That's how it works. How does the consumption of fossil fuel enter into this? Well, the thing is, fossil fuels, it's like oil, gas, coal, are essentially animals, plants, people who decomposed millions of years ago and have been stored in what is called a basin. So you have a basin, stuff accumulates, on top you get stones, this stays there under a lot of pressure for many years, and then it turns into coal, oil, and gas. So essentially, this is saved carbon dioxide. So theoretically, using fossil fuel and increasing the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere should have some impact on the carbon cycle. Now, for the sake of brevity and for the sake of appearing not too controversial, because I've taught this idea already to my students and I know how some can react, I will not talk at all at this point for human-made climate change. So I will not argue at this point against or in favor of what we're observing is caused by people. Because at this point, it doesn't matter. And it's a bit more complicated. And this is something we can discuss if you're interested in the question and answer session. Instead, we will simply look at something much, much more simpler and much, much more obvious. We are facing a change in global climate. And this is a fact. This is not an opinion. In fact, the temperature increased. It's easy to see, to measure, in the last 100 years by roughly 0.8 degrees Celsius. Again, this is not debatable, that's a fact. And to give you a bit something which you can possibly better relate to because it's closer to you, I will now show you a couple of ideas from Moscow. Why from Moscow? Because I moved to Moscow 2 years ago. Last winter was beautiful. The snow was amazing. It stayed there for a couple of months. This winter, it was not. And it was really not pretty, and there was essentially no snow. So I got just curious. Let me just look at the data and provide evidence and generate facts. So on the x-axis, you see time. Sorry, this is a typo. This, I think, it doesn't matter. It will not change anything. Let me not create any confusion. And on the y-axis, you see temperature. And this is the average temperature in December in Moscow in a particular year. Okay? And what you see already in terms of the line, it's going up. So the temperature is increasing in Moscow. This is just data plotted on a simple graph. Now I can do something which, again, economists work with, and I can, don't worry, I will not make it complicated. Ask, has there been what is called a structural break in the development of the temperature in Moscow? What is a structural break? A structural break is you have a relationship between two variables, like time and temperature. And let's say the relationship between time and temperature until a certain point in time is 0. And then it is positive. So it's increasing as time goes on. This is called a structural break. So the relationship between two variables changes over time unexpectedly. And you can do this analysis carefully, and what you will find is there was a structural break in 1960 in the temperature of Moscow in December. Until 1960, the temperature was barely changing. And since 1960, the temperature started going up. If you do this analysis even more carefully, which I'm not going to do, you get two structural breaks. You get this one, you get this one, and then it breaks here one more time and starts going up quicker. So in the last 70 years, 80 years, it's a fact, it's not an opinion. that the temperature in Moscow is increasing. And this graph is very much mimicking what is happening globally. Temperature is increasing. This is really not a matter of opinion. It's a fact. And the only debate which I think we should have is, what are we going to do about this? But there seems to be still disagreement, and many people now talk about whether human beings can actually do something about this. I said this already. So the obvious question, given the style of the lecture I'm giving you, is to ask, do we know from history, has it ever happened that climate change caused the collapse of civilization? And you may end up being unhappy to find out that yes. There are several examples. I give you one which I like, and it's coming again from Gerhard, and it's considering the Norse. The Norse is civilization which essentially came from Norway, or Scandinavia in general, and populated the western part of Greenland. More precisely, they colonized North America, or western parts of Greenland predominantly, roughly 1,000 years ago. But 500 years later, they disappeared. They got extinct. And current evidence suggests that actually climate change in combination with deforestation has caused the extinction. So roughly 500 years ago, the Earth climate went to a small ice age. And this resulted in the region which was populated by the Norse being less productive. And as a result of that, the Norse got extinct. So they stopped existing. Gerhard Diamond has fantastic stories on that. But in the end of the day, they essentially started killing each other because only little resources have been left. So in flavor, what happened is this. So the resources were going down, the population was still growing. At some point, the unit of resources available per person was too little to survive, so they starved to death or killed each other to survive. Okay, and then I ask, of course, the usual question, which I've already asked before, is this inevitable? Well, and the answer is luckily no, again, it is not. It's not inevitable. And the example, which is not provided by Gerhard Diamond, but some other sources, is coming from the northwest of Latin America. In particular, it's coming from the Moc civilization, which flourished in the northern Peru from about 100 to 700 Anno Domini, which is 1,000 years before the Norse. So we have 1,000 years this civilization flourishing, and then 500 years the Norse flourishing. The Norse weren't able to adjust to local climate change and hence got extinct. On the other hand, these guys, they adjusted. The current evidence suggests that actually they adjusted very quickly. They experienced a climate change which brought more sand to their fields, which didn't allow them to do agriculture anymore. As a result of that, they very quickly relocated and moved further inland. So they dealt with the facts that local climate is changing and adjusted accordingly. Now, unfortunately, this is, to the best of my understanding so far, not an option for us dealing with global climate change. We cannot leave this planet yet. But acknowledging that it's happening and trying to figure out what to do to deal with this sounds very reasonable. So I'm actually already at the end. I think I was a bit too fast, and it's okay. Then we have more time for questions if you're interested. I started the lecture with the idea that, unfortunately, facts and opinions are given equal weights in debates. If you discuss color, that's fine. If you discuss political decision making, that's maybe very wrong. And that we have just seen recently how problematic it is if you listen to opinions and don't listen to facts. Now, it's difficult to develop facts. It takes time. But you should still do your best to listen to facts. And then I gave you examples for the exhaustion of renewables, the exhaustion of non-renewables, and the adjustment to climate change. And I gave you examples, negative examples. So basically, exhaustion of non-renewables, exhaustion of renewables, and non-adjustment to climate change, and how it led to either the complete collapse of a civilization or an economic collapse. But I've also shown you that at the same time, other countries which face similar situations faced the facts, understood that they were struggling with climate change, or they understood that they're running out of a renewable resource, or they understood that they're running out of a non-renewable resources, and introduced rules and regulations designed to fix it, and they fixed it. So I guess I wanna end on the note that I hope that by going through this coronavirus crisis, some people understood how dangerous it is to listen to opinions and not facts, and will now try and collect facts to make up their mind on those two issues: exhaustibility of resources and the use of resources, and the adjustment to climate change. Because as opposed to coronavirus, these two things are irreversible. Once we screw up the global climate, we're done. Once we run out of oil and we don't transform our economy, we're screwed. Once we destroy the fisheries in the oceans, we won't get them back. Rely on facts. Facts are difficult to generate, but there are journals out there which can be used to get informed. I think I would like to stop here. Thank you very much.
I guess we have some questions in the chat.
Okay. What do? Do I stop sharing, or do I start sharing?
I think we can leave sharing and just you can just answer it.
Okay. Sorry, what am I doing? Am I reading something, or am I waiting for the question?
There are questions in the chat, so you can.
Oh, all right. Okay.
Yeah,
no, but okay, got it. Okay.
A bunch of questions.
Sorry, which question am I going for? Are there any other interesting resources about them which, if possible, are a little more modern than Arthur Pigou? Okay. So yes, absolutely. Look, my job here is to give an overview. It now depends. So Timur asked this. Okay, Timur, if you give me, because most of my lecturing uses, I don't think, without exaggeration, uses papers from journals from the last 15 years. But this was not my job today. My job today was an introduction. And for that, I need to start in the classics. Now, if you give me a question which you're interested in, more specifically, I can give you a paper or an overview. Are you interested about, I don't know, what's the evidence on exhaustibility of resources, or are you interested in theoretical models? Or so I need a bit more information, and then I can answer that. Are any interesting books about economics? So are there any interesting books about economics? This is this is a more general question, I guess. I would argue it depends on what you like. Actually, this links maybe nicely to how to develop facts and how to do research. Let me do it that way. So who asked that? Okay, again, Timur. So Timur, it depends. I mean, people are interested in different things. So what I can tell you that when I do research, the advice I give my students, and this is the advice I keep following, is I do not start projects which I'm not excited by, because this is maybe the most important driver. I think it sounds like a reasonable guideline for life in general. Choose a job you like and choose a profession you like. I cannot answer a general question like, are any books interesting, because it's person specific. Do you think it's effective for politicians to build the campaigns around climate change? This will, I guess, depend on the culture, on the country. So my job, I think, as a person working on natural resources, is, besides writing papers and understanding this better, is to communicate to the rest of the world that, look, guys, there is a lot of evidence that this is happening. A lot of evidence. And I guess in a country where many people are convinced because it has been appropriately communicated, it's very reasonable for a policymaker to focus on this. Yeah. From my point of view. Okay, I'm not quite sure what that means. What will happen to Russian economy, which depends on natural resources? For example, oil prices will plunge. Well, they did. Or if these resources will run out, or they will become useless. Yeah. So my way of thinking about this, without running into complications, I'm happy to follow up. If somebody's interested, drop me an email. There is enough evidence to suggest that we still have a lot of oil and gas. So maybe even within your lifetime, we still have enough oil and gas. So I think the more urgent, so Russia has. So I think the more urgent problem is climate change. Now, having said that, if you want to focus on how could a country deal with that, the typical answer of economists is you need to diversify. So right now, from the top of my head, I think 1/5 to 1/3, so maybe 1/4, something like that, of Russians' budget, state budget, and Russia's GDP depends on oil and gas. This is maybe a lot too much. So you can diversify, you can develop other sectors which could buffer the collapse of the oil price. Yeah, and this is typically advice to governments. Now, the problem is not that this is not known and well understood and done by some countries. The problem is that in some cases, the leadership is simply not interested in following the advice for political economy reasons. Is the gross national product in your country higher than in Russia? I suspect so. I guess by your country, you mean where I'm from. But from the top of my head, I actually, yeah. So the secret of Russia's possible wealth is just investing petrodollars in healthcare, local business, educational system, and so on. Okay. This is a question very much related to let me tell you this because I think it's important. I've shown you, and this is maybe also related to Timur's question, who said the papers are old. I've shown you a couple of, just a selection of papers for motivation. And the thing is that natural resource economists, to a large extent, already understood what to do and how to deal with this. It's not like we don't know how the central bank should react. We don't know how you should extract, how you should sell. Most of those things are well understood and known, and we know how to deal with this. The problem is there seems to be increasing evidence that once you're resource rich as a country, criminals are more likely to get in power. And if they are in power, they're more likely to stay. And the most recent paper on this, I think the most convincing one, is coming from India. And it's looking at local regions. It's a paper by Asher and Novosad from 2000. It's forthcoming now in Review on Economics and Statistics. And they basically show that if in a location in India, which is gold rich, the gold price is high during an election or just before an election, the probability that a criminal will be elected into power is higher, and subsequently stay in power and get really rich is more likely. So as a result of that, what is happening is people running the country are less interested in taking care of the country. But in principle, we know many things and know how it works. Okay. Thank you. Don't wait.
So we have some participants who want to turn their cameras on and ask you directly. So
sure. Let's go with
guys.
That. Sorry, Gerhard. Can I ask you?
Sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, hello. I've got two questions. First,
yes,
about the lesson, and second is a bit strange. So the first, you said that climate change in combination with deforestation caused the extinction. So I didn't quite get it. And can you explain it again, please?
Okay, sure. Think about it the following way. In the winter, in Siberia, presumably it's very cold. Luckily in Siberia, you have a lot of trees, which allow you to make fire and warm yourself up. Now imagine you're in Siberia and it's getting even colder, then demand, presumably, for the last, I mean, there you have a lot of forest, but if you're in a place where not too much, will go up and you will just use up the remaining trees. As a result of that, the next winter, you will not survive because you will not have any more trees left which you can use for heating. That's what happened to the Norse. And this is described in Gerhard Diamond. Okay?
Yeah, I figured it out. Thanks a lot. And can I ask you a second question? As I said, it's too strange, but you said that you came to Moscow 2 years ago. And the question is why?
Why? Easy. I mean, no, I think I'm happy with the question. It's unrelated. Look, I have several reasons, but let me give you one which I can publicly defend and which is, I think, true and ideologically driven. The relationship between, so I was born in Kazakhstan, so my mother tongue is Russian, but I left when I was 8. So I cannot teach in Russian. In the last 10 years, I've observed that there is a deterioration in the relationship between Russia and Western Europe. If people stay in Russia who grew up in Russia and people stay in Western Europe who grew up in Western Europe, this will remain like that, I think. And I think people like me need to travel back and forth to contribute to the creation of the connection. So I think it's nearly my job to do this.
Okay, yeah. And also, I wanted to thank you for this really insanely lesson. That was really nice.
Thanks. Thanks. Okay. So I'm now, where are we? We have 3 minutes left, right? So I go through the next question.
Can I
I guess
also ask a
so.
question, please?
Go ahead. I don't know who asked this, but please go
Yeah,
ahead.
it was me. It was me. Yeah.
Okay.
So I have
Anna.
2 questions. The
Okay.
first one is, do you think at this point it will be more effective if we introduce renewable resources in countries as fast as possible, or continue to hold discussions about how to minimize impact of fossil fuels? And by more effective, I mean can minimize the impact of climate change.
Yeah, I understand. So basically, you're already on the second step. You're kind of convinced, okay, it's happening. What can we do about it? That's your question, right? And one of the potential answers is, how about renewables? Okay, so let me tell you 2 things, I guess, to that. I have the impression that one thing is a bit confusing. Most people at that point will tell you something about electric vehicles. But the thing is, they barely matter. And to a large extent, this is for 2 reasons. First, even if you introduce electric vehicle, it's not clear at all that they're going to use renewable energy sources. They can also use coal and drive on coal, electricity generated by coal. And the other one is that in overall energy consumption, it's not very important. Sorry, I guess I'm not appropriately asking to your question, because you've asked about renewables.
I mean, for example, Tesla now has a patent on solar panels that you can put on roof, and they completely made out of, like, the roof is made out of solar panels. So
yeah, I mean, so the short answer
things.
to this is sure. I mean, everything we can generate in terms of electricity and energy, which we're not using from fossil fuels, will reduce fossil fuel consumption. The thing is, I'm not convinced that this is the easiest way to go, because they're expensive and they often need to be subsidized, and economic forces can be very powerful. I think the easier way is to convince the public that they should just consume less. I think in many, many circumstances, what we're consuming is just completely unnecessary, and you can reduce your consumption to a large extent. For instance, just to give you one example, I suspect that after the Corona crisis, academics, so like me, who would be invited to go and present in another country, and for that they need to fly and consume fossil fuels, they will not do this anymore. Because we have learned that we can actually exchange like that, and it's okay. So basically what I think will happen is that more and more academics will do presentations like this, avoid flying, and this will reduce demand for fossil fuels. So I think this is already would do a lot to reduce demand.
Okay, so it's more important to hold discussions on how to minimize fossil fuels overall.
So the basic idea is you want to minimize the consumption of fossil fuels.
The use of fossil fuels, yeah.
Yes. And you can do this in different ways. You can do it by reducing demand, or create alternative energy suppliers. This is the creation of renewables. Yes, please. You were saying.
Do you think carbon tax would be effective?
Oi, this is a huge debate.
It's a huge debate.
And I mean, in principle, carbon taxes can be effective, but I don't know the literature on this and the up-to-date, so I wouldn't want to talk about this. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So where are we now? Whoever is navigating the lecture.
Hi.
Hello.
If we have no question, actually, the time of our lecture is already over. So we can finish it, I guess.
Okay.
But we have still like 8 minutes. But we have some.
Okay, look, I
events-
see two
yeah.
more questions, I think. Let me just
So
go through the...
let's answer these questions and then we will
Okay.
finish. Great.
Did
Okay.
Moscow lockdown overall anyhow impact the use of natural resources in the city, or the period of time was too short? For sure, it has an impact. You can see this. So there are really nice pictures from space showing that the lockdown immediately reduced pollution. And in terms of fossil fuel consumption, you can see this because this city in particular is using a lot of cabs and taxis. And you were not allowed to move, or you were allowed to move much less. And as a result, demand again for transportation dropped greatly. And so I'm sure it had an impact. And as I just gave in my example, in terms of academics traveling less, I have the hypothesis that it may have a long-term impact. But this is a hypothesis. This is not a fact. Okay, wait. So what can we personally do to conquer climate change? I think talking to friends and just explaining facts, this is already good enough. There are surprisingly many people out there who just don't see the line going up. This is just it. This is good enough. And then we can debate whether it's human-made or not and how we can adjust. This is the next level. What do you think about new cars that do not need petrol? I think I said it already, so I don't think electric vehicles are the way to go. Okay, and Grigori has a last question.
Yeah, okay, but my name is not Grigori, but Georgi.
Oh, Georgi, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. My
question
Russian is limited.
Yeah, I understand you. So can you demonstrate your skills in Russian?
Yes, this is an interesting question. And on that we stop. Да, я разговариваю по-русски, и разговаривать я умею на легкие темы. На тяжелые темы я не умею разговаривать. Спасибо
А можно
большое.
тогда еще вопрос по-русски?
No. I'm not. I'm not. No. I really, I can listen, but I will not answer in Russian. I really don't. It's too difficult. But shoot, you can. I can listen in Russian.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Ask you in English.
No. I really understand. That's fine. I will just not answer in Russian. I will answer in English.
Какие темы для вас сложны в русском языке?
Ну, например, экономика.
Okay.
So I cannot talk about causal relationships in Russian. I wouldn't even know how to say that. Causal relationship. So it's so I can talk about lunch and going out and taking a taxi. For that, my Russian is good enough.
Гера, а насколько быстро вы выучили и поняли первые азы в русском языке?
What is that?
Георгий, я немножко прервусь. У нас есть замечательное видео, которое снимал медиацентр Лэш в прошлом году, где Герхард рассказывает свою историю, как так получилось, что он жил в Казахстане, как он выучил английский. Да, у нас есть прекрасное видео, я вам тогда скину его. Вот, и я вам, ребята, его отправлю, чтобы как бы бэкграунд Герхарда стал для вас тоже явен. И на этом мы, наверное, закончим, и все вопросы про русский язык тоже закончим.
Спасибо
большое. Спасибо большое за лекцию, спасибо, ребят, что вы послушали, за ваши очень классные вопросы. Все, до свидания, тогда будем заканчивать нашу встречу.
До свидания, спасибо большое.
Спасибо, до свидания.
Okay, so...
Gerhard, thank you so much. That was really interesting.
Goodbye.
I'm happy to hear.
Bye.
Bye.
Like the lecture, bye.
Thanks.
Okay.
You have video footage of me.
Yes. We have a small interview. It's called Your Economic Story, and you tell your life
really?
story.
Okay.
Yes, I will send you a link.
Okay, do that.
Okay. So
All right.
thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a nice afternoon. And
It was
thanks.
pretty clear, everything, and your gestures were like super great. Everything was
I'm
super
happy. I'm happy to hear.
understandable. Yeah.
I wanted to make the point, and I'm
Okay.
happy.
So thanks a